Hello, Cardstack community. My name is Chris C. I am the founding director of the Cardstack project, coming to you from the land of Web3. I'm so delighted today to be joined by Nader Dabit, who is DevRel at Celestia Lab and the founder of Developer DAO, to talk about the journey of Web2 developer going to Web3, learning about all the new things, not only the things that people talk about, but also the things that's right at the horizon that allows us to not only scale up, to create more use cases, to create more relevant application, but more importantly, really take the talent that we have gather in the world of technology and apply to a more decentralized and more equitable future. Welcome, Nader.
Thank you so much for having me.
So I follow you on Twitter, and I've seen your own personal journey coming from Web 2 to Web 3. Can you tell me a little bit our audience about your background and what brought you to this land of Web 3?
Yeah, so I've been a developer for about 10 years now, and previously to joining the Web 3 or blockchain space, the last role that I had was over 3 years at Amazon Web Services, building out and kind of helping out, I would say, the front end web and mobile team with a handful of tools, services, SDKs. We were focused, on a handful of things, mainly on the back end side, on the infrastructure side, serverless technologies, API gateways, using things like GraphQL into AWS services, as well as the client side SDKs and tooling that enabled developers to kind of have a better developer experience and getting started experience with Amazon Web Services. So I was there for a little over 3 years. Before that, I was focused on mobile development with React Native for a couple of years. I actually ran a consultancy that trained developers for building out mobile apps that were using traditional languages and native, the native environments like writing Objective-C and Swift and Java. Before that, I was just a web developer, a front-end engineer, I guess you could say, for a few years. And I got really interested in Web3 at the beginning of 2021. I was kind of already trading crypto for a few years, but I didn't really know why these tokens existed until I started looking into a handful of the protocols, and I learned about, as a developer, some of the ideas behind Web3 that to me were really, really exciting and fascinating. And as, a developer, again, of 9 years at that time, I was kind of a little bored maybe with a lot of the things that were happening in the traditional space, and that we solved, most of the main challenges around scalability. And, we were just essentially making incremental changes. I did enjoy working at AWS on the infrastructure side that enables developers to kind of build out their own ideas. And as I learned more about Web3 protocols, I became fascinated by them, and I wanted to kind of work, in Web3 and more specifically building developer infrastructure for Web3 developers.
Sometimes it feels like in Web 2 or in the cloud space, you're playing a game and you beat the final boss. You spend $200,000-$300, and they're just walking around doing side quests and trying to get 100% completion. It's not like it's not challenging, right? But it's a little bit kind of putting your time and see if you can get some Easter egg, versus coming into Web3 is like playing an indie game. It's like, what is this thing, right? So what's your experience about, do you think the developer tooling in the time that you've been in Web3, has it improved? Is it something that a developer with your previous kind of training in web and maybe mobile and maybe cloud, is it ready for them to build real application, in your opinion, today, 2022?
Yeah, I mean, the answer is definitely, it depends, what type of application that you want to build. Yeah, because you can build stuff today, but you can't achieve the same user experience for the most part, I would say, for if you were kind of going to build a clone maybe of an existing traditional application that scales to, for example, a social media application that might handle literally a billion users or something like that. So we're not there yet there, but we also have applications that just simply can't be built in Web 2. For instance, DeFi protocols that are, just something you can do before, along with things like Lens protocol, which are a portable social graph that is extremely, extremely interesting and exciting to me. In fact, probably the most exciting thing happening since I joined the space, because social graphs are $1 trillion, industry between Facebook, TikTok, all these different platforms that enable creators. But the problem is almost all of the revenue is being funneled through the creators to these mega corporations into the advertisers.
Yeah.
And, the nature of Web3 and blockchains is that we kind of like get rid of these middlemen. And I think that that's what you're seeing with protocols like Lens, where you can kind of have this direct connection between users and creators, users of the application and creators. But also, like, I don't think it's like, while I'm not a fan of advertising and ads, I don't think it's something like we should be focusing on to get rid of advertisers. Instead, I think we can build more, I would say healthy relationships between advertisers and the creators, and have direct connections that enable people to kind of make money without having this big platform taking 80 or 90% cut out of that.
Absolutely. Like when a brand say, hey, here's a Facebook audience I would like to target to get my product or DTC, direct to consumer product, DTC product to the market, Facebook's taking 60 to 80% of it just for the access to it. And if one way to think about this, and it's interesting to think, like, it's not that advertising is bad, it's that the money is not going to the customer, not going to the brands, not even going to the publisher who's creating engaging content and bringing people to the platform. It's just going to Facebook, or it's just going to the Facebook Meta Inc. corporation. And one way to, we've been thinking about this is that the customer acquisition cost that goes into advertising can be more equitably split. And we have a lot of ways of figuring out what that dollar amount, whether that's in a token like ETH or in USDC, how that splits up. And if it goes to the team that is doing the media, if it goes to the team that is maybe going to customer themselves, like customer acquisition costs going directly to customers, it's kind of like a token drop, right? An airdrop is kind of like giving your future customers money to spend and stuff like that. And that is the type of mechanism that we have in DeFi. So that's why it's really interesting to me, and I want to get your thoughts, that the person who came up with the idea of Lens protocol is the person coming with lending market in Aave, in the ETH space. So do you expect more monetization ideas coming from this like intersection of decentralized social media and decentralized finance?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they're already intertwined by nature. So I think that we're going to see a lot of there's already a lot of interesting ways that you can already transact between users on Lens. So for example, you can actually, you can easily do stuff like, okay, I want to charge someone to follow me. And you can do that like without a lot of work. You could say, okay, if you want to follow me and see my content, it's going to be like, this much. You can set that up really easily. You can also do crowdfunding. You can, through the platform, launch some, NFT or something like that. And a good example of this was like Lenster, which was like the first front end application built on top of Lens protocol. It's kind of like something like Twitter or something. They are subsidizing the gas costs. So like when you transact on Lenster, it's free. So in order for them to recoup some of that money, they've done these things where like, oh, you can collect this post, and they just create a post and like you collect it and then you pay a couple of dollars to do that. And a lot of people did that, and people are happy to kind of do that because like, they're offering a service and we're able to kind of say, oh, we appreciate that. And here, and then in exchange, we get something like an NFT or something like that. Another example is that when you follow someone, you are essentially collecting an NFT. So that like, you have, followed 1,000 people, like you now have like these 1,000 NFTs. What those people can do is that they can actually do token gated content that says, if you're following me, like I can show this thing or I can not show this thing. Or they can say, if you've collected this post, that costs money or something, you can like do this thing. So like there's all these things that you can do that are really just starting to become experimented with, because it's only been like a few weeks, I guess, maybe. Or
Well,
so a few months
in
max.
real life terms, that's been years, but in crypto terms, it's been weeks.
So they're like, these ideas are like not only possible, but they're now possibly like already being experimented with, and some of them have been experimented with.
Yeah, I think the concept that Stephen Johnson, the author, came up with, the adjacent possible, is that all the things in DeFi and tokens and all the things now we have a decentralized social protocol like Lens, the adjacent possible of those interaction of those spheres kind of blurring together is really exciting to me, because I think part of the difficulty is that the payment side of the social network has been very separate. If you actually work for Facebook, like if you work on the business side, you're like in a different like organization, right? Like the people who are doing products engagement and stuff like that is one, and then the people who do business, while they're important to the business, let's be honest, it's a little looked down upon us as the ad guys, like not really the real like the organic people. Whereas here in DeFi or in decentralized Web3 land, we're just working on protocols, and if it's money is involved, great. Money's not involved, fine. And so I think there's going to be a lot more interesting things. What do you think? You mentioned about like this protocol that is not this UI that's providing this kind of interface about like subsidizing gas. Do you feel like the concept that you have to pay the network something to put a post or put a follow on, that idea is so foreign that the only way to get mass market adoption and social media protocol call on decentralized is to subsidize gas? Do you think that's a necessity, or do you think that's a temporary, I don't know, smoothing of a expectation?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I hadn't really considered that the way forward was to kind of subsidize it until I started obviously learning more about how easy it is to kind of implement these gasless transactions. And we started seeing networks that were inexpensive enough to make this feasible.
Yeah.
Because like obviously before something like Polygon and maybe Solana and maybe like just a handful of other networks are the only places where these things would be feasible today, because you can't even do something like this on Optimism or Arbitrum, because you're still paying, a few like 25 cents or a dollar, I don't know, whatever for transaction, which is not like feasible for a social media app where you're liking posts and you're, doing all the, you might be doing dozens of interactions per day. So that would end up costing you hundreds of dollars per month or something. And that's probably not, but I do think that for the average user to kind of be onboarded into Web3, that this might be the way to do it, or at least this seems like a viable option. And the fact that there are ways to kind of subsidize that through the platform itself seems that if that's the case, then you can kind of offer a free mechanism for users to transact while still having enough money to subsidize what's going on. The one question I'm not sure about is, and I haven't really understood exactly how, I haven't looked close enough to how the transactions are, processed through, because they have their own API that they're kind of like using that's not calling the contract directly. So it's kind of like not a direct contract call. So I'm wondering like if there is some type of Sybil like resistance that might need to be put in place, because like if someone is obviously subsidizing these transactions, then if someone wanted to kind of just use up $1 million, maybe they could just write a program that would do that. So I'm assuming that there's something built in that prevents that, but I haven't looked into that enough.
It's really tricky, and meta transaction is one of those things. Anytime we give away money on Web3 or even in the internet, people will find a way to take every single dime out of your pocket and put it to someone and put it back together, right? So we've investigated this idea that Cardstack is focused on the user experience, and like not only building a single useful dApp or that would be user friendly, but building a framework so the developer can build on top of it. So we work in the JavaScript ES modules space to try to make that sensible. But some of these big problems of meta transaction, we wanted to solve in a more general way. So what we've learned and when we did research is that surprisingly, the best thinkers around meta transaction is the Gnosis Safe team, the smart contract wallet on EVM. They have a scheme where you can delegate in your Gnosis Safe certain certain tokens as gas tokens. So it could be like a USDC or USDT or DAI or something like that. And the way they prevent Sybil resistance is to deduct it from that wallet. And so what we're trying to figure out is like, could we like front it and then deduct it later on? And it turns out that it's probably better to just give someone some ton of money upfront and then deduct it from the network. But then you shift the Sybil resistance, like who do you give $1 to, right? But the $1 can only be spent on gas, but then you can also harvest it. So this idea of like Sybil resistance in Web3 is so hard to do that it's actually really hard to figure out how do you make sure that people don't like do that. So our conclusion after thinking about all of these things is that $1 is so little money. Think about it as game points, right? Like if you go to a mobile app and you do React Native and you do like an app purchase, something like that, $1 gets you a long way. So maybe use $1 to buy your name or something like that, reserve a name, and then you have $1 to spend. On a network like Polygon, you can probably do 1,000 transactions on it. But it's really hard to eliminate that kind of like Sybil stuff. I agree with you.
Yeah, I wonder also like if someone would, especially, and we're going to get to talking about Celestia in the future in a second, but it would be cool. I'm wondering if someone like deployed their own blockchain that had a native token that was the gas, and therefore the protocol could issue tokens for
That's a good idea.
platforms and applications that they wanted users to be able to transact on for free, and then like you could kind of subsidize it directly through the network.
Yeah,
it doesn't have to be it doesn't have to be a thing where like, I mean, obviously if you issued a bunch of money to someone and they decided to sell or whatever, like that would be a thing that could, I guess, happen maybe. But for the most part, I'm sure like there has to be some way that you could say, okay, I'm going to launch my own chain with its own native token, and the token is going to be used for gas. And if you deploy an application to deploy like an application to this protocol, and we want to support it, then we will issue you tokens from the protocol itself. Maybe, I don't know.
I think protocol minting, instead of minting to miners for proof of work or minting to people who are staking, minting to users is a really good idea because they need only a little bit, right, to go a long way, especially on a network with low cost. I think it was interesting to kind of like transition to talking about this idea of a modular blockchain. I think everybody really benefited from Ethereum being all in one, like everything is there, so you can kind of get how that whole experience work, what the contract, the storage is kind of all one runtime. And now that people are looking at like layering things, layer 1, layer 2, layer 0, layer 6, layer 4, layer 5, that people are recognizing that this monolithic thing that is has been help us so well. I'm not saying that Ethereum is the AOL of blockchain, but I am saying it's all inclusive like AOL, and there's opportunity to do that. In your view, now obviously you've joined Celestia and you believe in the vision. What is the kind of main benefit to developers who are looking at building their own application to decide to, instead of building their own smart contract on a network like Ethereum, to say, hey, maybe I can deploy my own blockchain? When do you think that would be a good idea?
So when do I think would be a good idea for someone to deploy their own blockchain as opposed to using a shared execution environment?
Yes.
Well, I think there's too many trade-offs today to say, oh, you should just deploy your own blockchain, obviously. But I think that's the direction for sure that we're headed. I think that the idea of launching an L1 and expecting everyone to transact on that L1 as the approach, regardless of the scalability that you can achieve, it's still going to be orders of magnitude less scalable than the roll-up approach. So I think that what we're moving towards is everything is a roll-up. I think that the layer 1 is always going to be a base layer for roll-ups, and if you architect your blockchain in any other way, then you're probably not going to be as scalable as other solutions in the future. Of course, this is a really like early discussion because like this is more of an idea. Even though we do see roll-ups already happening, I think what we haven't seen yet is this true modular approach that enables the scalability, that data availability sampling that Ethereum is implementing, as well as Celestia will then enable. And I think that like right now, it probably doesn't make sense for anyone other than like a massive like DeFi protocol like DYDX is doing and launching their own chain that has the engineering power and the money and like understands how this stuff works today to maybe do that like right now. I mean, obviously you can do something like this like on Cosmos today maybe, but I think that I think in the future and maybe a year or two, when we have the tooling and it's extremely easy to deploy your own app chain and your own blockchain as it is to deploy a smart contract, then it would make a lot more sense, because you're not only going to get all the benefits of blockchain modularity, but you'll also have more scalability, because you're not sharing this execution environment with 100 other or a million other applications. The only the only people that are interacting on your chain are the people that are interacting with your application.
Yeah. Sometimes when I tell people like Ethereum is a world computer, I say, no, Ethereum is like the tiny computer, like about like a Raspberry Pi, and just replicate it 480,000 times, right? Like everybody's doing the same thing on top of this tiny computer. It's not really, there's no built-in scalability. It's just replication of the limited execution space. Do you see, is Celestia's vision that there will be many different types of execution environment on top of the same data availability, different programming language, different consensus model? What is the vision there? Is it more diversity of programming approaches, or is it more like, hey, this is one true way, this is one way to scale it?
No, I think that's absolutely right. The first scenario, where we have a lot more options and a lot more, I would say, different choices for developers, but we also have a lot more innovation and experimentation at each layer, because when you have everything coupled together, when you make a change in one area, it kind of like really affects the entire system. But when you have these specialized layers, and you can do stuff like, oh, I like the EVM, but I don't like having like this feature, or I need this additional feature, or maybe I really like, Solana sea level, but I want to make a few changes, so I'll fork that. Or maybe I like Fuel, which is going to be a really, really powerful, I think, execution environment once it's ready to be used in production. Let's say you like something about one of these execution environments, but you have a new idea or something like that, or you need something maybe specific to your application. You can just make that modification and you can deploy it. So like you're gonna have a lot more experimentation, because like you can't just really I would say do this that easily today.
Yeah, when you deploy on Celestia and like new execution environment, is the front end of it still using the tooling from the EVM space, or from the from Fuel? What is the story on how it interacts with the user? Assuming the bottom end of it, like the back end, using a cloud term, is more modular. How does it affect the overall experience to go the way of modular blockchains?
For end users or for developers?
For end users.
For end users. Oh, no, there's no difference. You still are going to be using the same wallets that you've always used. You'll use MetaMask, or maybe you'll use Phantom, or you'll use Kepler, or whatever. So, nothing changes for the user.
I see.
The network RPC changes, and I think that hopefully like what we're going to see is better wallet UX, so it doesn't really affect the user at all. Like they just land on a site and we automatically handle all that stuff for them.
I see.
And it doesn't. The user doesn't see any effect. Hopefully the only effect that they see is like a faster and cheaper transaction happen, as opposed to what we have now.
Yeah. So it's interesting that we were talking about data availability. So there's two types of data, and people don't know this. People who work in cloud does. One is transactional data that updates when you click on a button on the shopping cart. The other one's analytic data, like a data that you get the streams out of like, Kinesis or something like that. And then you get like analyze a bunch of data in Redshift and the database and like that. Analytic data has always been kind of like tagged on to blockchain. A lot of times in private company like Chain Analysis, they will index it. Some of them is in open protocol like the Graph, where people make these kind of transformation rules, still more transactional and analytical, and you have Dune and everybody else doing analytical data. Does analytical data, given that it's bigger with greater volume and variety, does those things fit inside the Celestia vision? Could I put like social media analytic data and get consensus around those data sets to do maybe a recommendation algorithm or something like that on top of that data? Or is it still really limited to the type of transaction data that we're used to in DeFi?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very good question around, when we talk about data availability, because like it's the name data availability doesn't really say a lot until you actually understand what it means in the context of how we're speaking to it, I guess you could say. But really, the same types of data that you would save in an Ethereum transaction or an Optimism or Polygon, that same type of data, which would be smart contract interaction. So it might be a map, or it might be like some type of wallet address or token balance or things like that. Those are the sorts of things that you would transact with.
Yeah.
And Celestia, would just serve as the data availability layer, like for that. You probably wouldn't think of data availability in the terms of how we're speaking to it, and in the sense of something like file storage, like PDFs or videos, like
IPFS,
that would be some, that would be IPFS or Arweave. You also wouldn't think of it as something like, I want to index and query a large data set. That's more like something that you would use the graph for. But maybe you would have an index of Celestia itself, using the graph, or you might build one yourself, and then you could kind of gather that analytical data. But you could store whatever data that you like on Celestia. Celestia doesn't even verify the data. All it does is provide data availability and ordering, so consensus and data availability.
Yeah. Could I store Git data on Celestia?
You could store whatever you like, as long as you, I guess, paid the transaction cost.
Right, because we did a lot of investigation about using document storage and then more flexibility, and Git obviously with some schema you can actually store very Git is kind of like a Merkleized, like linear, kind of hash of the tree, right? So that's kind of like a blockchain. There's certain application that makes a lot of sense, checking in code and making sure those things are referencing the right things. Git is pretty good at that. That's why we have mono repos and repositories and stuff like that. So I'm always wondering, like when you're doing modular storage, like could I have like a Git chain, like a Git blockchain sitting on top of Celestia? That would be interesting.
Yeah.
So I also kind of look at this as a way of like, when we talk about the inside baseball of blockchains and low level stuff, a lot of developers, especially ones that are still gainfully employed at SaaS companies, doing really important improvement to winter 2022 releases to add delegated administration. They look at these things as so many jargons. And I know you started a project called Developer DAO, which you took all the jargons, Web 2 and Web 3 combined, and gave people different slices of this alignment to those jargons. What is your sense of the kind of the DAO community in Developer DAO? How many of them are like familiar with the Web3 jargon we just mentioned, we just talked about in the last like 20 minutes or so? How many of them are just about to learn it, and how do we kind of teach them, and how do we make it non-intimidating?
Yeah, I mean, the Developer DAO is just a community of people, developers that want to network with each other, share opportunities, share ideas, educate each other. And it's a great place to like make friends. It's a great place to learn stuff. It's a great place to do pair programming, and it's just a cool place for unique not really, but I would say like for similarly minded people. But like the unique thing being that we all are all developers. So like there's a lot of other DAOs that were out there before Developer DAO that had like maybe a developer channel, but there was no like place for everyone that is a developer to go to a single community, and that was a DAO. Obviously there were tons of communities, but there wasn't really a Developer DAO. So that's kind of how it formed. And we have a mixture of traditional like Web 2 developers and Web 3 developers, but for sure almost everyone in there is Web 3 curious, or they're working in Web 3. So like maybe they're a Web 2 developer and they were like, what's an NFT? And then they might have like minted the NFT because it was free. And they were like, oh, okay, like I'm going to use this now to access the Discord. So like that's kind of their first entry point into Web 3. And maybe they stayed and they got a job, or maybe they were like, oh, I don't like this, and they left. And they exited the DAO. And to do that, you can just sell your token. And like it was free to mint, but you could probably get a few $100 for it today. But we're not focused on the speculative aspect. We're more focused on the community and public goods of what we can do within the community.
Yeah, I think it's really smart to get people to mint it for free, and then also you have to use the Etherscan to do it. So it's just a little bit of almost like a test from the recruiters. Like, are you a developer? Do you understand basic principles of function calls? That was smart. I mean, it's also easy, but it
was easy.
I don't know.
But you're right. If there was a button that you could press and just like mint 1,000 of them, what would have stopped someone from doing that?
Yeah. So it was good. It was a good hidden trick question on the billboard in San Francisco or somewhere like that. It's like, hey, if you can read this, then you're the people we want. Usually done really poorly and like somewhat from recruiting that doesn't really understand the zeitgeist, but you did it well. That was the tool to use. So
Thank you.
do you see, with crypto going up and down and the economy going up and down, a lot of DAOs who has a lot of speculation type of like fever, also to have some kind of loss of vibe, for lack of a better word. How's the vibe at Developer DAO today?
Yeah, I mean, I think that massive price fluctuations that often result in people like losing their jobs and stuff definitely are something that affect everyone. And we're somewhat insulated from it because like we've never ever focused or even talked about speculation. Like everything that has to do with money within our community is more about like how can you find a job and make this amount of money working for a protocol or a team, as opposed to let's get together and like find some Ponzi scheme to kind of like get rich off of. Like none of that discussion happens at all.
Yeah.
We don't really promote like NFT projects. Like we don't like get into all that stuff. We just focus on education. And like my core belief is that if you become a good developer, then you can land a job making more than enough money than you need, and then you can go do whatever you want with it. If you want to speculate, if you want to go on vacation, whatever. But like I think that's the whole idea, is like we're just focused on up leveling people's skill set, and then with that they have the tools that allow them to kind of make money, and then they can then go do whatever they want. But like we're not big into that, so we haven't had as much of an impact than like maybe these financial DAOs or these speculative DAOs. But yeah, I mean, you do see a little bit sometimes of a like lower amount of engagement during like the bad parts, and then like when things start getting better, you see a little bit more engagement. But overall, we haven't really seen a huge difference. Like the same people that were there a few months ago, for the most part, are kind of still there. We're still putting on like, our newsletter, our events. We still have a lot of stuff going on.
Yeah, and I think that's the when we DAOs are like, perpetual parties, right? Supposed to be really exciting. And parties, some have lulls. Like people say, don't show up one week or they show up another week. So it's good to have a rhythm, has a meaning, has a group of people who are like-minded. I think that this idea of finding like-minded people is really important. So when you're looking at like Web3 in general, now that we have kind of the technology we need and more developer interested, what is the type of application you would like to see built? Obviously, DeFi, despite what everybody says about it, actually performed really well. A lot of the primitives on DeFi on liquidations and oracles that kind of got us into trouble in the last cycle really withstood a lot of pressure, so that's pretty good. DAO tooling, I guess, was people talked about it. It's still Discord plus a couple of other token gated tool. What is the type of Web3 user facing application that excites you, especially with the talent growth that we're seeing with people with product skills, UI skills, back end skills? What do you see is the next kind of like category?
There's 4 areas that I'm really interested in. One is wallet UX. The other one is wallet UX. One is scalability solutions. So some of the stuff that we're working on really excites me. One is social graphs, and one is point of sales. So I think if we can really get all 4 of those to a level that's much better than they are today, then we will be able to onboard and grow and enable a lot of great, not only like use cases and experiences, but we'll unlock things that are just will benefit humanity. I think like public goods and stuff. So, for example, a core thing that I think that we need to continue focusing on is point of sale systems around the world that enable low transaction cost, stablecoin transactions really easily. And I think like what you see with initiatives like Solana Pay, and I think Polygon is doing something with the mobile integration, and then Solana is actually building their own phone. I think like people are realizing that for the next like say billion users to kind of come on board to Web3, one of the most powerful use cases of Web3 is just cryptocurrencies, and I think in particular some type of stable coin that enables people to transact globally without a lot of like inflation or deflation, and being able to like get paid or buy crypto is one thing, but like that doesn't help someone that needs to go buy groceries. What we need is a way for someone to be able to then take that currency and then be able to walk into their like corner store and buy a drink or something like that. So we need the low transaction costs. We need integrations that are really easy because if I'm running a store and someone comes in and is like, I want to pay with crypto. And all it takes for me is to kind of like download an iPad app and then immediately I can start receiving money. Like that's a pretty big improvement over what we have now. That's like a very low barrier to entry. So like, I think, and then once you have more people with wallets, then you're able to then onboard them into all types of other applications. So social graphs is something I mentioned. I think that we have obviously seen that social graphs are a really powerful and popular way for people to interact with current web and mobile applications. They allow people to connect with people. Friends. So like we know that people like to use them. So but there is an actual massive improvement in how Web3 does social graphs, and that you can take your audience across multiple different applications without having to rebuild them. So like with Twitter, like I can get 100,000 followers, but like I only have 1,000 followers on Instagram, and like nobody follows me on TikTok, and YouTube is different. But what if I could just build this audience and then I immediately already have them following me on YouTube, and they're following me on TikTok, and they're following me. And that's like really, really powerful. And I think it resonates with a lot of people because like it's a lot of work if you're out there trying to build your network or build some type of social media audience. So the fact that Web3 enables that, and Lens protocol is already doing that, and you now see like a Lens YouTube and a Lens Twitter and a Lens blah, blah, blah. So those are the areas that interest me the most, those 4 areas.
I mean, we spent a lot of time thinking about, what would it mean to build a mobile wallet that allows you to do like WeChat Pay directly to each other. And that's what we launched. If you go to the App Store and search for Card Wallet by Cardstack, we have a stablecoin base, ERC 677, so one, no approve necessary, direct transaction between merchant, where you type in the number, show a QR code, scan it, we get an intent URL, we set up a no safe transaction, gasless all the way, merchant pays fees on gas, right? We got that working. So we know that the capability of building meta transaction and feeless gasless transaction on top of stablecoin based payment using ERC 677, reducing that approve and transfer two-step process, the unlock process we have. We've proven that end-to-end. We actually launched that in the beginning of this year. But once we got that working, and again, we mentioned that we have a mutual friend who has been in the React Native space. We kind of took Rainbow, which is more of an investment-focused wallet, and I turned it into more of a WeChat Pay type of wallet. That really taught us a lot. And we realized that consumer payment and like B2B payment is like the same thing. You want the same experience. You want the same conversion. We saw the disaster with UST. Stablecoins are not necessarily stable, so we integrated Oracle. Unless it's within like 1%, then we snap to the 100, 100, one DAI is one USDT, unless it deviates by a certain amount. So this idea of user experience and actually safety for traders is something we built into the protocol, and we are so proud of our team of having launched that. It is definitely possible. Wallet UI is very, very important. But with that basic idea and the end-to-end thing we're building, like what other things can the wallet do if that infrastructure is in there? What kind of, can it become a super app the same way WeChat became a super app on that one? So a lot of what I'm really, really interested in, personally adding one to your list, I'm really interested in the messaging stuff that people are working on. Wallet messaging, XMTP, I know is working on that with Waku, and so is Wallet Connect 2.0 is working on that. I certainly looked at Matrix protocol with end-to-end encryption. It's interesting, not as decentralized as the Waku base, which came from the status team. But I think if we get messaging into it, then this analogy is getting better and better.
That's really, really interesting. Yeah, and I think I agree. It's cool that how wallets enable, identity and also like a portable social graph, but also a portable like identity across like all these different applications. So, and I think the idea of public data and public infrastructure is really interesting in the sense like if you did build a messaging app, then you could have like, multiple interfaces on top of that messaging protocol that enable, people to kind of mix and match features and create new UIs and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, one of the features people keep like talking about without knowing it's a messaging feature is how do I get my DAO contributor to sign? Well, it's a messaging and workflow. and notification problem. So having better messaging will certainly make that, currently pain point, especially for Treasury DAO that has certain type of multi-sig requirement, that a little bit easier because nobody reads the Discord, right? If you have like 15 Discords and you have to sign something that's buried into 3 channels on like a private channel, you never get there. So I think it should be a wallet thing. Should be, hey, you've been the last one. You're late to the party. You're like, 4 of 7. You held people up for the last 3 days. So we're delighted that the Nosa Safe, the Safe team, not Nosa Safe anymore, they're rebranding the Safe community, have the resources they need to grow the ecosystem. Cardstack is a part of the foundation guardian thing for the Nosa Safe community. And I think multi-sig wallet on EVM chain, hopefully on top of Celestia modular blockchain, will still be kind of a very, very important piece of giving people like a group ability to act as individual, and I think is a really, really powerful thing. The toolings are not quite there yet, but I completely agree with your thing. I think the scalability aspects of it is one of those things where it enables other things, scalability in messaging, scalability in social graphs, scalability in data. It's all really, really important because right now we go on a blockchain. If we get adoption, like 10 million people try to do transaction for $2 each or 2 USDC each, that very few blockchain, Polygon included, can handle that without causing something. So I think this roll-up feature, maybe even like roll-ups on roll-ups, would be necessary to get that type of performance.
Yeah, I mean, the best way to kind of conceptualize like the core paradigm shift that's happening is that, let's say that we want to build out an application, and we have the option of sharing an execution environment with like a million other applications, or we can have our own.
Yeah.
And I think that like when you think about it in that way, it immediately becomes clear what is the more scalable choice between the two.
Yeah. And I think the bridges, which are getting more and more mature, allows value transfer. Let's say everybody in a particular country or city decide to settle on a particular blockchain using, let's say, our protocol for revenue processing and merchant processing. When they earn the money, they can bridge it to another form of stablecoin on something that has entered and exit to a fiat on-ramp or tied to a credit card or debit card or something like that. So the idea that you don't need to always go to the shelling point, you can kind of like net settle in a cheaper execution environment, and then only batch end of day move your USDC or your token to another chain that has more of a financial thing. So I think this idea of the day-to-day, minute-to-minute interaction can absolutely move to the edge of the network, and just using that kind of like center chain, like the chain that has the greatest liquidity, let's say Ethereum today, as just a net settlement. And I think that vision makes a lot of sense. And I completely agree that if you have compatibility in the execution environment, you don't really need to roll up directly against Ethereum mainnet. It can roll up somewhere else as long as the bridge to connect them. And I think those are arriving. At least I think they are.
Yeah. I think they are. There's a lot of really exciting teams that are literally focused on just solving or providing different varying solutions with different trade-offs to that. Really great, smart teams. I think one of the ones that is interesting to me is Nomad, but there's a handful of others as well. I think it's like Layer 0 is one.
Yeah. And there are also some kind of layer protocol on top of that, like Socket and Router, who's kind of helping you navigate, okay, how do I get from this chain on this token to that chain and that token? And then providing a secondary indexing and routing algorithm on top of these existing bridges and calculating costs and gas is really, really cool. So I think we're there. I hope we don't need to ask our end user to log into 17 different dApps and connect to 14 different wallets to do a basic movement of money. But I think with the composability of the UI, which is also another thing Cardstack's working on, try to make it so that it's much more modular, so that a swap, a bridge is something that can be nested within a workflow, and then all you have to do is go to workflow, and then we break it down and help you sign each of the requests. Again, when you interact with the blockchain, it's just another type of signature. But if we can make the UI a little bit more like a macro, then it's much more easier to show the user what their intent is and then track them through the places without having to actually manually go to 4 different dApp interface to take those 4 steps. So this nesting and composability UI, I think we're ready for it because all the backend and all the smart contracts are already there. It's just a matter of spending more time thinking about orchestration at the JavaScript, module layer, and try to get that right. So that's another project we're working on.
Okay, awesome.
Yep. So, well, thank you so much for your time today. Are there anything else you want to share with our community? Something we missed in things that excite you in Web3 right now?
No, not really. I mean, we talked about some of the things that are most exciting to me. Again, I'm a big fan of Lens Protocol. I, would recommend if you're a developer, check out my YouTube tutorial that kind of shows you how easy it is to get up and running. I think a lot of people aren't aware of how easy it actually is. And if you're a traditional web developer, it should be extremely easy because all you're doing is interacting with traditional web APIs. You're not actually necessarily having to write any transactions to read some of these really nice selection sets and queries that are given to you by their API.
Yep.
Another thing I would say, like if you want to learn more about modular blockchain, the paradigm of it or how to build, then check out the section on the Celestia docs called Learn Modular. Mm-hmm. And it's a great place to go and kind of get a good idea around, how all this stuff works together and the value proposition that it proposes.
That's great. If you're watching this on YouTube, links in description. And if you're watching on another channel, thank you, Nader, to join us today and have this great conversation. And we do this every week, premiere on YouTube at 9 a.m. Eastern time on Wednesdays. So we love talking to builders and talking to people in the trenches and really, really trying to move this space forward, no matter what the climate, the temperature it is in the world and in our field. But it's always a pleasure to hear the perspective from someone who is optimistic and exciting and know that, hey, there's work to be done, and we're going to do this work together as a community. So
100%. Thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you. And as always, thank you for the community for your attention. Until next time, take care.